Hello and welcome to my first video diary for Context of Photography. I've decided I'm going to work on the theme of the internet, and I've been doing some research into online cults as like my starting point and something to get me thinking about the theme. I actually first came up with this idea by watching a show on Netflix called Explained, and they had an episode just on cults, so that was my starting point. And it raised quite a few interesting points about what defines a cult and how people actually become members of cults. So according to that show, there's three main things that define what a cult actually is, and the first one is a very charismatic cult leader who kind of considers himself as a god or a deity, or somebody to really look up to and kind of worship in a sense. The second thing is some kind of indoctrination process, thought reform process, mind control process, whatever you want to call it, which essentially, brainwashes people into thinking a certain way based on what the leader is telling them. Obviously this is based on religion, so a lot of people who end up in cults are kind of religious anyway, so perhaps Christians that have lost their way or something like that. And the third thing that defines what a cult actually is the exploitation of its members. So a lot of the time big cults will sexually exploit their members, or just exploit them in the sense that they brainwash them so much that they're willing to do anything for the cause. The documentary also went into detail on the indoctrination process and the steps of that. The first step tends to be finding yourself at a crossroads in your life, so perhaps something quite bad has happened in your life, or you're going through some kind of mental problem or something like that. Something that's kind of made you reconsider your life and where it's going in the future. The documentary said that the second step was a soft sell, which is essentially just beginning to consider where this cult could help you. Perhaps you've heard something online or from a friend that, something that they do positively for their members, or perhaps even going to one of their services and seeing what they have to say, basically. So once you become interested in the cult, the idea is that you just slowly become more involved with them to the point where that kind of is your reality now, and it's almost like you're putting a blinker on to the outside world. Like, this organisation is your entire world now. You found a new family, you found a leader, you found your purpose in life, essentially. A relationship with the cult leader is also, of course, a very important step in the indoctrination process. The cult leader tends to, consider themselves as a god and pushes that belief onto the other members. Tends to be quite subtly, actually, like by making them first consider them as a parental figure or something like that. So just somebody to look up to, somebody to aspire to consider your family, really. So once you now believe this cult is your new family, the leader tries to make it seem like the outside world is the enemy, that if you leave this cult then you won't be safe anymore, that you might die, that you'll be raped, you'll be murdered, all of these terrible things just to keep you in the cult, really. There's also a lot of peer pressure involved, so if other members of the cult are doing a particular ritual, for example, then you can't exactly say no, or there's more pressure to stay in the cult, more pressure to conform a certain way. So it does basically become all consuming and becomes your new life, and you're kind of blindsided to everything else that's going on in the world. So the documentary briefly went into how these cults can move online, often on chat rooms, for example, like Reddit or 4chan, or 100 others that I've never heard of before. But a lot of time they don't have a filter that you have to get through, so you can express your views as openly as you want, which of course is perfect for radical views of cult members. The indoctrination process is actually quite similar to a real life cult. Obviously you've got the peer pressure from the other members of the chat group who are expressing their very extreme views that you might not feel like you can oppose very easily. You might begin to agree with what they're saying, so much so that you take on their radical beliefs and form a new reality for yourself, again becoming completely blindsided to the outside world, and in which case anybody who opposes that is the enemy, and you've got yourself trapped in a cult. I'm not sure how dangerous or proactive these online cults could actually be, because I think that would probably stem from a cult leader suggesting very radical things, which oftentimes isn't seen on these online chat rooms. But of course they're still real, they're still out there, and they still suck a lot of people into a false reality. There are some cases of online cults where they do have a leader, which I'll go into in a moment, but I would first like to talk a little bit about Jim Jones, who is the leader of the People's Temple, which is a little bit of an older cult, which was formed in 1955 and disbanded in 1978. A lot of people saw Jim Jones as somebody who was ahead of his time. He really wanted to integrate the black and white communities together, and I think he was actually one of the first Americans to adopt a black son into a white family. So a lot of people saw him as, you know, a person for social change, and they saw the People's Temple as a movement for that. I actually have a list here of the things he offered members of the People's Temple. He had a senior home where obviously the elderly could live. He provided drug rehabilitation. He housed the homeless. He had a daycare and a medical centre, and was seen as this leader for social change. So really there was no way you could oppose him. He was just seen as this very charismatic man who stood for so much good in the world. So I could really understand where people were falling for this and becoming part of his cult. He eventually showed his true colours and proved himself to be a man who was absolutely obsessed with having as much power as he could. He would publicly beat people, and whoever, you know, was at these beatings would cheer and, you know, basically degrade and humiliate the person who was being beaten for whatever reason. He considered people who left his cult to be traitors, and he vowed to kill all traitors. He even got people to sign blank pieces of paper and would type up false confessions, like saying things that, you know, they killed somebody or they were a child molester or something really, really terrible, just so he had some kind of blackmail on them if he ever needed it. The thing that shocks me the most is that he performed this ritual that was very similar to Holy Communion, in the sense that, you know, everybody gathered and had a glass of wine and everything, passed the wine around, which was very unusual apparently for, you know, their practices. They'd never done this before. Everyone was just like, oh, this is new, this is interesting, you know, we'll give it a go, you know, and they drank their wine, and then after everybody had finished their wine, Jim Jones said, okay, I've poisoned you all and you have 10 minutes to live. You know, I was watching a documentary about this guy. This is where I got this information from. And one guy on there said, you know, it was a frenzy. Nobody knew what to do. We were terrified. And eventually he just said, you know, it's all a joke. It was all a test. And you've passed. You know, you've shown to me that you're committed to this cause and you're willing to do anything for it. And that was the first suicide practice, and that is actually eventually how the cult ended, is that he made all of the followers commit a mass suicide by drinking poisoned Kool-Aid, I think it was. Before that, he set up Jonestown in Guyana, which was supposed to be like, you know, the land of milk and honey and, you know, a fresh start, a fresh place to build a new community. But it was essentially all lies. I mean, he took a very select few you know, members of the People's Temple with him to set up this new community, and he made videos to send back to America to encourage the people left behind there to eventually join them when, you know, it was set up and everything. Apparently it was full of lies. I mean, even down to little details, like he was saying like, oh, you know, these bananas are the best bananas in the world, can't get stuff like this in America, and they were obviously imported because, you know, the footage showed that they all had the little labels and stuff on them. I know that's a silly detail, but apparently he lied about a lot of things that he did in Guyana, and I mean, obviously before then it was just kind of tactics to, you know, continue to show himself as this big mighty character who's, you know, a messenger from God. Okay, and before I kind of move on to talk more about the online cults, I just want to read a few quotes. These are actual quotes from Jim Jones. I represent divine principle, divine socialism. I will not pass away, but I shall stand throughout the endless ages of time, was my favourite one that I picked out. My power is dependent upon your faith and your willingness to serve. I happen to be a messenger, if you want to look at it in those terms. I happen to be from another planet, or another plane, or you call it heaven. I just cannot believe people didn't see how absolutely crazy this guy was. I mean, I've got one more here. Obviously these ones were kind of more religion based and showing him as to be this godly figure, but this one kind of goes in a completely different direction. It's just a bit mad. We have to be prepared for the Armageddon. We have to be prepared to go to other places of the world if a dictatorship takes over. Not one of my children are going to end up in a concentration camp. I find it so hard to believe that anybody can listen to these things and not think this man was absolutely insane, but, you know, I am not a religious person, so I suppose, you know, if you have the need to believe in something, then you will believe anything. So, but that's kind of, you know, a real example of cults. So let's move on to online cults, how they form, where they come from. I was actually watching a Channel 4 drama called Kiss Me First and thought it actually worked really well as, you know, additional research for this project. Essentially what the show is about a girl named Layla who finds herself in a very difficult situation. Her mum's just died, she's running out of money. Essentially she's about to hit rock bottom, and the only solace she can find is through a virtual reality game called Azana Planet. She finds another player who she becomes more interested in, wants to know more about. They eventually meet up in real life. Her name's Tess, and she explains that they have this online community called Red Pill, and it's essentially for social outcasts like Tess, like Layla, and a bunch of others. And they get together, they share their problems, and they basically find this, peaceful community and loving relationship with one another. They do have a leader, his name's Adrian. He created this space for them, created this community for them, and he seems to be very much like a cult leader in the sense that he dictates to them what they should be doing, dictates to them what he thinks is best for them. He tells them that they're amazing, that he thinks that they're very special, in order to gain this very trusting relationship with them, which makes them want to do anything for him. When they become members of Red Pill, he sends them what is called an Azana band, which is an actual real piece of technology that they use as part of their virtual reality equipment. They wear it around their neck, and it makes them feel real life pain. So whatever pain they feel in the virtual reality game, they feel in real life, which I kind of thought you could draw parallels with perhaps some kind of ritualistic thing as part of a cult. All the characters are very vulnerable and have their own issues. Tess, for example, has drug issues. There's another character called Calumny who has a very toxic home and his parents don't seem to love him very much. Another called Denier, who's in foster care and is being abused. And several more. There's a transgender person who doesn't feel comfortable expressing that he is actually a she. So obviously the leader Adrian is preying on the weak, and he eventually persuades some of the characters to go to an island and essentially start an entire new life. Quite similar to Jonestown, I would expect. They have to give up all of their belongings, they have to burn their passports and their money, and they have to dress very minimalistically. And something that I thought was obviously very important to the story is that they all have to take a red pill, which kind of, slowly drives them mad and, pulls them in further to, the concept of Red Pill as a real place. So whilst it is drama and it's not based on reality, I thought it was a good show to help kind of visualize, how these cults can form online, how they suck people in, and how they become somebody's reality. So I actually did manage to find a real example of an online cult leader. Her name is Tail Swan, and her general belief is that your spirit chooses your path before you were born. So your spirit decides, I'm gonna pick this family to be born into, this culture, this religion, this path in life. This is my goal, and this is why I'm choosing these things. So basically everything is determined before you're born, and you are part of a universal consciousness, which essentially means everybody is connected spiritually, everybody is part of this universal consciousness, and as you grow, the universe grows, and everybody is one and the same kind of thing. She also believes in what she calls the law of mirroring, which essentially means that there's two realities, the one in your head and the physical reality, and if you create a reality in your head, it will become your physical reality. So say you want a really fancy car, you can think about this car, you can imagine buying this car and driving this car around, and eventually it will become your reality. Or say you have a terminal illness or something, for example, and if you think in your head, I am going to get better, I am going to overcome this, eventually your reality will be that you overcome it. Which is obviously not true at all, but that is what she believes. There was a quote at the end of her video explaining these ideas, and it is, "This will be an end to loss, this will be an end to manipulation, this will be an end to terrorism, this will be an end to the suffering on this earth." And if that isn't like Jim Jones, I don't know what is. So tell me she isn't a cult leader. One of the main reasons why this woman is kind of considered to be an online cult leader is because of her controversial YouTube videos. One of which, and the most controversial, the one that is kind of most talked about, is one about suicide and kind of how to overcome it. I have a lot of notes from this video. It's quite the video to take in all at once. And I do not understand how it's supposed to be, you know, a helpful video to somebody who's watching it and trying to find some reason to live. One of the first things she says in it is, "You can always kill yourself tomorrow. You can always kill yourself in the next 5 minutes." So blasé, and, you know, it's just like, yeah, you know, so matter of fact about it all, which I personally don't think, I'm personally not suicidal, but I don't see how that can help anybody who is. And she regards suicide as a reset button or a safety net, as kind of like a backup option to life, which I just, mind-boggling to me. But yeah, she goes on in the video, and you know, there's a lot of shocking things that she says. She says, "If you do nothing about the pain, it will eventually go away," which I think is probably terrible advice to give somebody who is suicidal. I mean, I hate to get personal about it, but I mean, I have a number of family members who have been through depression, and I think that's probably one of the worst things you could have said to them, because, you know, you have to be proactive in your own mental health, and you can't just sit around and wait for it to go away. That's not going to help you. She then kind of contradicts herself and tells whoever's watching the video to become fully aware of their pain, and to realise what is causing them pain, and to become aware of it, and to express it in any way they can. Which is the exact opposite of ignoring it until it goes away. So she then goes on to give what I think must be the worst advice anybody has ever given in the history of advice, which is to tell somebody who is suicidal to imagine every gruesome detail of how they would kill themselves. She literally says, "Fall on the floor right now, pause this video, fall on the floor, and imagine that you have killed yourself. Imagine all of the details of how you would kill yourself. You know, how you did it, where you did it, who would find your body, how your funeral will go. Imagine your soul leaving your body and ascending up to heaven. And imagine, you know, the final feeling of peace that you've been craving for so long. And just hold on to that for as long as you can." And she says, "Eventually your mind will, you know, begin to stir, or want something more, or want some kind of stimulation, and then you'll wish you would have lived, you wish you wouldn't have killed yourself." I mean, I just think it's utterly shocking to tell somebody who is suicidal to imagine every gruesome detail of their death. There's no words. I think that is just mortifying, to be honest. She then concludes the video by saying that you need to commit 100% to life rather than 100% to death. I think it's actually quite an interesting statement, because apparently from, you know, actual professionals, bear in mind this woman is not professional in any way. She has no qualifications. She shouldn't, you know, be teaching this stuff at all. She goes around America teaching this stuff. She shouldn't. She has no qualifications at all. But yeah, anyway, she says to commit 100% to life instead of 100% to death. And people who actually know what they're talking about have criticised this woman and said, you know, even people who do commit suicide, mentally, they're never 100% committing to death. There's always a part of them that wants to live. So, you know, she's full of contradictions, and really she doesn't know what she's talking about. She also plugs her own resources several times in the video. She mentions a book that she's written that's going to be released like in a couple of years or whatever. She mentions some other videos to watch to help you get back on your feet. She mentions her website and people you can contact that she has personally trained, you know, to help you get back to it, essentially. Which I think is definitely not the right video to be trying to make money out of, but there we go, and that's what she did. But I think some of the comments on that video are particularly interesting, just in the sense that they just seem like they've completely fallen for her games and her act, and, you know, whatever you want to call it. I'll read some to you. "I don't see how people think you're telling others to choose suicide. They are greatly misunderstanding you. They just take pieces of what you said and try to interpret them rather than listening to the message as a whole. I always knew in my heart that you were a good person, and I am glad I checked this video for myself. It's not good to just make a judgment based on others' views or hearsay. This one's quite long, I won't read all of it, but it says, I thank you. You've saved me from my inevitable end. The ending was spot on. I wanted people to suffer the same way I've suffered. No one on this planet will ever understand my story, and I don't feel like telling it publicly, but what I want you to know is that I'm in a very dire situation and no one will ever try to understand that. Then goes on to say that this person tried to, commit suicide, like she explains to do in the video, and what exactly he saw, and eventually says that he wanted to live, and you just can't imagine my happiness and my fear at the same time. The moment I resumed the video, I felt a little bit better, then even more better. In short, I'm very grateful to you. You've saved me. There's several simpler ones, just saying, thank you, Teal. I think you may have saved my life. Teal is a genius. I love you, Teal. Thank you for helping me realise. You speak to my heart. The last several days I thought of suicide. It was so intense. I shared. They judged me for being too sensitive in life. I feel you're the only one who understands how I feel without judgment. It just speaks absolute volumes of these people are fully drawn into, her cult, essentially, her way of thinking, and it's toxic, and people definitely shouldn't be agreeing with the things she's saying. I mean, she doesn't even know what she's talking about. She's not even qualified to say anything about these things. I did a little bit more digging into her as well. She has her own blog where she, kind of goes into more detail in the things that she believes. There's a very interesting article on how she feels about the mental health system. She says, if the average person is feeling bad, I would tell them to stay as far away from the mainstream mental health care system as they possibly can. It is a system that has claimed the lives of millions, all in the name of trying to help. You have more free will in jail than you have in a psych ward. Psych wards are the modern day Holocaust camps. She goes on to say that very few people actually have a mental illness. Most people are falsely diagnosed, and that medication is the only thing that is prescribed for people with these mental illnesses. She says that medication is very risky because we don't know enough about the human brain and how it works. Fair enough, but they're very rigorously tested to the point where we know what they do on the human brain. She also states that pharmaceutical companies make money out of people with mental illness by making and selling these drugs, and that's why more isn't done to help people with mental illness, which is obviously, again, completely false, because, as I've said, I have several members of my family who have suffered with depression, and they've been recommended no end of alternative therapies and counselling and everything on top of any kind of medication they were on as well. So again, it's just, she really doesn't know what she's talking about. She also states the worst thing you could ever do to someone from a position of authority is to turn them against themselves, which essentially is what she's saying is it's wrong for a doctor to diagnose somebody with a mental illness because you're telling them that there's something wrong with them when there isn't, is what she's trying to say, which again I don't agree with. I don't really understand how you're ever supposed to get better if you don't know what the problem is in the first place. I mean, think about a physical condition. Say you broke a bone or something. It's not going to get better on its own. It's not going to get better if you ignore it, if you believe that it's okay. You need medical assistance for that kind of thing. So again, I don't understand how she has such a following when she obviously has no idea what she's talking about. One of the main things she teaches is called the completion process, which essentially relies on somebody's root trauma, which is defined by trauma you had before you were 8 years old. She believes everybody has this kind of trauma, even though obviously not everybody experiences that kind of trauma. She believes everybody has that kind of trauma, and you need to remember and understand what it is in order to overcome problems that you're having in your life. This kind of treatment is obviously very, very dangerous. I mean, whoever your counsellor or practitioner is guiding you through this process will try and find some kind of trauma in you. Even if there's none there, they'll, basically fabricate memories and tell you that you have had some kind of trauma when you haven't. And for people who have had that kind of trauma, it can be very triggering to re-experience that. So again, something that I believe shouldn't be preached and taught by her, especially because she has no idea what she's doing and she doesn't understand the damage that something like that can do to somebody. I don't know if this is for certain, but Teal herself has claimed that she was in a satanic cult from ages 6 to 19 and that she was raped, tortured, saw some very horrific scenes. So obviously that would class as her root trauma. So I wonder if, because she went something so horrific that, she thinks everybody has gone through that kind of trauma, and that's why she believes in the completion process so much. I don't know, it's just a theory. In the same article where she mentions that she was in the satanic cult, an expert, Rick Ross, who is the director of Cult Education Institute, said about her that she fits the pattern of a cult leader. She has apparently become an object of worship, and it seems that her charisma and her supernatural claims are the driving force of her school of healing and workshops. So very much like Jim Jones, you know, she has taken these beliefs, forced them upon others, preached them to the point where people kind of see her as almost like a deity, as a messenger from God, as somebody who's saved their lives. So, you know, they follow her quite closely as somebody to be really respected, which obviously gives her all of the characteristics of a cult leader. Okay, so that's all the research I did into cults, how they start, where they originate from, all of that stuff. I feel like I've got a pretty good base to work from now. I definitely think I want to work with moving image for this project, just because it's something, you know, I've worked with a little bit in the past, and I want to build up some new techniques and really become confident in it. Plus, I think it will work really well with some ideas that I've already had. So I found a video on Vimeo called The Circle of Abstract Ritual, which was created by Jeff Frost. His two primary mediums are time and sound. He creates a lot of installation pieces using photography, painting, actually very abstract, very beautiful time-lapse style videos. So the Circle of Abstract Ritual seems to have a focus on kind of like light and shadow. He plays with time-lapse in a way where you can see the light moving, you watch the stars go by, kind of like watch the light rays move across a room or something like that. There's very fascinating shots in the piece where he uses time-lapse to kind of speed up like a painting process in a room. Often he seems to use abandoned rooms or whatever and kind of like paints into them to create like these beautiful abstract pieces of art where they, you know, they kind of just seem like they kind of just grow across the wall, and you know, there's something quite inherently creepy about it. You know, the accompanying sound effects are very creepy, and he uses quite dark and eerie atmospheres. There seems to be an overall, you know, emphasis on the simplicity of it, you know, because really it does just appear that he's focusing on the lighting and the shadows and the shapes that he can create. But you know, I just feel like it's so impactful and so beautiful and very symbolic, and I feel like he contrasts it well with the occasional shot of the city, and I think it just works very beautifully, and like I say, quite symbolic, and I think something that I could really work with in, you know, that symbolic sense. You know, create images similar to that, using time-lapse to create, you know, ritualistic perhaps places and things like that. So I will be experimenting with that before I give you my next update, and I'll let you know how that goes. So yeah, that's all of the research I've done so far and my initial ideas on what I can do to start getting my project going. Like I say, I'll be showing you any time-lapse footage that I create in the next video and any additional research that I do as well. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.